Hey everybody, it's Tyler Esselman.
And Michael Osinski.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
This One Goes to 11, the podcast where we invite someone to share an album with us that they believe is perfect.
So perfect, in fact, Michael, that 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
That's a very important day, Tyler.
Oh, God, I guess it is. Full disclosure, everyone, we're not recording on Election Day, but we are aware that this episode is airing on Election Day. Hope you're all keeping your heads and hope that everything is running smoothly. Is that what we hope?
I mean, I think we just hope they all voted. You know, that's the thing, right?
I'm still of that mind. I'm still of the mind that I'm going to vote. I think I'm meeting more and more people in my life who say that they aren't. For my money, I'm going to go ahead and do it for a little while longer.
Well, we're not a political podcast, so...
not yet.
No, wait, what? No, we haven't talked about this. This is not happening.
Oh, God. Michael, oh, shit. Who are we talking to today?
Oh, my gosh. We are talking to Alexis Jaworski.
Alexis Jaworski. Oh, my God. A child of the 80s, or more specifically, a Zennial. Alexis is a lifelong Chicagoan, currently living just a bit further north along Lake Michigan in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She spent most of her professional career in the creative arts, serving as an arts administrator for contemporary dance and theater companies throughout Chicago, as well as a producer for award-winning documentary films and branded content. In her spare time, she enjoys midnight dance parties in the kitchen, snuggling her own Hounds of Love, spoiler alert, and her granny hobbies of knitting, weaving, gardening, and baking. Oh my God, and I know Alexis because of our time working together at the infamous Chicago Athletic Clubs. Alexis Jaworski, how are you? Welcome to This One Goes to 11.
Oh my gosh. Hello, you guys. It's such a pleasure to be here. So excited.
Let's drop some knowledge on these people.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun because you've been in the back of my mind. You've been in the hopper as somebody who I thought would rise to this challenge of the pod. Well, I was enthused at your enthusiasm to be a guest.
Like, so honored. Long-time listener, first-time caller. And I mean, honestly, Tyler, like having like random conversations about music, like throughout the club, and just like finding time to have, I don't know, little tidbits about this album or this band or, you know, this one time back in the 90s type of stories was always so much fun. And I'm glad that we get to do it here.
Alexis was working in membership. She was one of the sales reps when I was working in the customer service desk at the infamous Webster Place Athletic Club, part of that system. Amazing gym, just a great gym. And like you said, it was a perfect environment for that water cooler talk, right? And so much good music info gets passed through water cooler talk, which is why working remote is a little difficult sometimes. But you have impeccable taste. I know this about you. So why don't you let our listeners know, we already hinted at it a little bit. What album hath thou brought before the This One Goes to 11 tribunal today?
I have brought Hounds of Love by Kate Bush.
We talked about her briefly. I do believe that former guest Janice Rowland Radway gave her own rendition of a small portion of Wuthering Heights when we were talking about Tori Amos. And like, I anticipate that name's going to come up again today, mostly because I'm going to bring it up. But I think like I'm happy to talk more about an album of hers. And in fact, Alexis, I have the responsibility this week of delivering what Tyler insists is everyone's favorite segment. What is it called, Tyler?
It's called The Beginner's Guide to Kate Bush's Hounds of Love in 60 Seconds.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, he's doing it. This is who you want doing it, though, Alexis. He's really he's better at it than I am.
All right.
But as you probably know, as a listener, you're going to get your chance to assess his job at summarizing Miss Bush and this album in 60 seconds before you start building your airtight case. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, Michael, are you ready? I've got 60 seconds on the clock.
Yep, this is going to be another motor mouth one because I think I'm a touch over, but we'll see.
The timer will tell.
Yeah. Okay.
We're starting in 3, 2, 1.
Catherine Bush grew up in a 350-year-old farmhouse in East Wickham because of course she did. She produced a homemade quality demo at age 11, which found its way to Pink Floyd's David Gilmour, who funded a better demo, which got her signed to EMI, who did not know how to promote a female artist. She used her EMI money to take interpretive dance and mime classes and to produce her debut single, Wuthering Heights, in 1978 at age 19, which made her the first female artist to achieve a #1 single on the UK chart with a self-written song. She quickly took creative control of her career and self-produced the rest of her albums, including 1985's #1 LP, Hounds of Love. The first side featured 5 commercially viable songs, including Running Up That Hill, A Deal with God, which re-entered the charts 2 years ago thanks to its appearance on Stranger Things, while the second side, titled The Ninth Wave, after a Tennyson poem about King Arthur, consisted of 7 tracks that could play as one continuous opus. Her eccentricity and her few public appearances earned her Miss Havisham comparisons, but she has continued to make music. She has collaborated with other artists, including Peter Gabriel, and she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just last year.
What?
It was perfect.
It was perfect.
I had to speed it up a little bit, though. That was a little faster than I usually go, but I'm glad I did. I got it all in. So
well done. Yeah, Alexis, what do you think? Yeah, how did he do? How would you grade him on his job of summarizing Kate Bush and this album?
I mean, 11. That was fantastic.
11.
There's a bunch of tidbits in there I did not know. No, I'm actually well, I love this album. I'm not actually, I don't listen to that much Kate Bush. I don't know actually that much about her outside of this, masterpiece. So I didn't know she grew up in a 350-year-old house castle and took interpretive dance in mind, but yet all tracks 100%.
that was my favorite detail to leave in, because I had to cut a lot of stuff out. But I was like, no, I'm going to put in the fact that she had all that EMI money, and she's like, all right, you fuckers, I'm going to go take interpretive dance and mime classes with this money because that's what I want to do. So, meh.
Here it is. Yeah.
But before we get too deep on Kate, we need to talk about Alexis, don't we?
Yes, we do. Before we dive into this album, Alexis, please tell us, what is and has been your relationship with music?
Oh gosh. I mean, it's always been there, right? And I think that's hopefully for a lot of people, but my parents listened to a lot of music. Both of my grandfathers actually were musicians. My dad was in a band in the 60s called the Bad Habits.
Great name.
I know, great name, right? Bad Habits. And they're still musicians. And so it's always music has always been something that's been enjoyed, encouraged, supported, whether that's going to see live music, taking up some sort of new instrument, having music throughout the house. So it's just always kind of been there. My dad's a huge fan of live music. He would take me to shows a lot when I was young, and still to this day, we still go to a lot of music shows together. So it's just always been part of my life.
Do you remember what your first show was you ever saw?
Well, so I have two ways that I look at this. One was the first show that I attended that I was brought to by my parents and didn't necessarily have the autonomy to choose which show I went to.
Sure.
And then the show that I went to by myself. So my first show, and I actually can't remember which one was first. I'll have to ask my dad, but it was either Huey Lewis and the News at the New Orleans Jazz Festival.
Ooh, yes.
Huey Lewis. I mean, stand the test of time, right? Or UB40. I'm not sure which one was first. I think it was probably Huey Lewis, but they were probably somewhere, I was probably, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, around there.
And you chose to go see UB40. That was the one that you wanted to go see, or
no? That was actually also taken by my dad. So
okay,
that was still of the I'm being brought along type of thing.
Okay, fair enough. I was about to say eclectic taste from an early age. I love it.
And then the one that my first show, I think must have been in 7th grade. I went with a bunch of friends, and it was the headliner was House of Pain, and at the Vic Theater in Chicago, and the opening band, who had just dropped their first album, was Rage Against the Machine, and nobody had heard of them yet. We didn't know, it was the opening band, and it was oh, this is something, right?
Wait. Rage opened for House of Pain?
Uh-huh. Absolutely.
Oh my God. Wow. That's insane. What was it like? Were you bowled over, or where was your head at with Rage?
Oh, it was I didn't know what to do with it, but loved it, but it was what is this? It was so hard and intense, and different. I mean, also not that I was a huge House of Pain fan. Like we just loved the song like Jump Around in 7th grade. They played it like,
right.
Who didn't? Who didn't love
It's
that
a
one?
great song.
Not what I would have expected, but like, of course, went out and got like the CD like the next day and like listened to it, like bopping around, a little 12-year-old listening to like Killing in the Name of, and
yeah, this is what Tipper Gore was afraid of.
Yeah.
This is exactly what Tipper didn't want, was for little 7th grade you to have Rage Against the Machine on your Walkman.
I was raging. Yeah.
Take that, Tipper.
Take that, Tipper. And it was wild. Like Zach De La Rocha's mom was there. It was like one of like their first shows, I think. It was kind of wild.
Wait, were they formed in Chicago? Because I know Tom Morello like grew up in Libertyville or something like that, or like it feels like they're a Los Angeles band. Like it was like the.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm Googling. Can you continue your conversation?
Okay. Well, so this is bringing something I always really appreciated about our chats in the club was like the Chicago of it all, as they say. You know, you mentioned being a born and raised Chicagoan and sort of the time at which you were, you know, in your adolescence was sort of a legendary musical time in Chicago history, and you're kind of already expressing it. How do you reflect on that time now and being kind of present? Who were some of the other bands that you saw on the come up that really affected you at that time?
Oh my gosh, so many. I mean, you know, so this was, you know, I was a teenager in like in the mid 90s, right? So let's see, gosh, just to like contextualize it. So like Kurt Cobain died my freshman year of high school. So like we're kind of just getting into like, you know, grunge and that sort of stuff. But like you said, there was such a thriving music scene in Chicago, and it also felt like so accessible. You know, like I grew up on the north side, went to school on the south side, and, you know, it was a time of like coffee shops and like underage shows, and just kind of were like traversing the city with a bunch of friends, either going to like random shows that we either didn't know who they were or we knew who they were, and kind of held on to like the opening band, and was just it just was so accessible. That's the only way I can put it is, you know, there wasn't barriers to a lot of things. So I was very lucky in that my mom lived in Lincoln Park, 2 blocks away from the Tower Records. So was able to like pop on over there and buy whatever like CDs I could with whatever money I'd seen or had saved up. And they also did a lot of like in-store performances too, which seemed, it was kind of an odd, you know, environment, but still, like I actually saw Smashing Pumpkins do their Siamese Dream release, and it was acoustic. And that was like, I think the summer of 93. I also saw them later at the Metro that summer when it was like their actual, like their show for Siamese Dream, which was just like unbelievable. But then the other part of that too is my dad lived closer, like in like Wrigleyville, Lakeville, and like 3 blocks away from the Metro. So anytime it just had access, you know. I'm trying to think like better ways to phrase that.
Well, were the shows cheap?
Super cheap, like $5, $10, $15. Like I didn't have a lot of money. So it would just kind of pop in. But there were certain local bands that loved, but haven't really seen or heard from them really since. Like I loved a band called Certain Distant Suns, and another band called Material Issue, which if you guys have never heard of Material Issue, so fun. Such a fun band.
Oh, cool.
But then, like, honestly, I think the biggest sort of discovery were a lot of like the opening bands. So, like, we went to go see Belly. I don't know if it was either the West or the Vic, but like they're kind of a one-hit wonder, like Feed the Tree or whatever. But the opening band was Radiohead, and they had just dropped Pablo Honey. I think Creep had hit the radio like that week. So it was just so cool. And like, you just kind of would pop in if something was, you know, not great at the Metro, you'd pop on down to like the Vic or going down to like the Fireside Bull, which I don't even know if that's around or if you guys are.
I think Fireside still is.
Yeah. Okay.
That's over. Was that one? That's the one on. That one's on Fullerton, over almost to Lincoln Square or Logan Square, right?
Yeah,
I believe it's still around. Yeah.
That makes my heart so happy. Yeah, it was definitely more. That was more of like a punk club.
Yeah.
But like, you know, all of our friends played some sort of instrument. All my little boyfriends were probably in different bands and would have a show at like Phyllis's Musical Inn.
I like imagining your little gaggle of various boyfriends. You know? Little cuties, little punk cuties.
But yeah, I mean, it just was kind of all around. Like my friend Maya took like guitar lessons from the guitarist of Jesus Lizard. My friend Aiden's dad was married to Liz Phair. Like it was just a time. That,
Oh my God. It just keeps getting deeper too. This is the thing.
And also these are just like the things I remember too, you know? But it just felt so free. You know, it kind of was like the leftover. We weren't as an exennial.
Exennial, that's how we say it.
That's how I thought it was.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, there still is like that leftover, like sort of like the Gen X where like you kind of leave the house and like, I'll be back at some point. I'm not really, you know, not always telling my parents what you're doing, but you know, you're going to be out and I have a roll of, you know, CTA tokens and somebody has their brother's car and we're not necessarily of age, but like we'll find our way around and like we'll figure it out. It's going to pop between, I don't know, music shows and house parties and, you know, just
causing trouble
in Chicago in the 90s. And it was fun.
The envy is just going to keep growing here. So we should probably talk about how you and Kate Bush met. So what do you remember about first hearing this particular album? Do you remember the moment? What are your memories of that?
Yeah, I found it because it was a cassette tape that my mom had. Probably between like the ages of like 6 to like, I don't know, 11. Like I was like always flipping through like my dad's like record collection, going through all my mom's like tapes and CDs and like popping things in and kind of seeing like, I don't know what all this stuff was. I loved as a child, this is, I don't know, maybe, weird or unexpected, but like I loved Eurythmics as a child.
Doesn't sound weird to me.
I don't know why. Like I was a toddler singing like Sweet Dreams Are Made of These like in the backseat. And that was like my jam. And so I feel like there's a little bit of like affinity and like overlap between Eurythmics and Kate Bush a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I definitely remember coming across and like it was like I feel like it was like next to Eurythmics tape and I was like, ooh, okay, what's this? And I popped it in and I was like, I didn't know what to make of it. And this is like all kind of like hazy, fuzzy memory because I don't know, I must have been like 8 or 9 maybe. And I remember I wasn't like scared of it, but maybe a little bit, but was like intrigued. You know, it was like dramatic and like witchy and poppy and like had all these things, but like I legitimately like didn't know what to make with it. But I definitely was like intrigued because it wasn't like anything you'd heard like on the radio or like on MTV. And it just kind of like, and I was a child, like kind of, it's so filmic and so cinematic that like I feel like it kind of like allowed your like imagination or my imagination to kind of run wild as a child. And like I certainly didn't like pick up on the narrative or know obviously anything about the ninth wave or anything like that. But I was just like, this is cool and this is weird. I like it, but I don't know what to do with it. But I still like kept listening to it because I feel like a couple of songs like really definitely like drew me in. Like Running Up That Hill like totally drew me in as a child. I forget, I think it must have been like Hello Earth or I don't know, something on the latter half that like, I don't know, I just like clung on to and just always throughout the different stages of my life, I haven't listened to it consistently throughout my life. And like I said, I was actually not like, didn't listen to like other Kate Bush albums, to be honest. It's like, this was like this perfect like little experience, this perfect like little world that like I really enjoyed kind of like revisiting through like different ages of my life, consuming it in totally different ways. Probably, you know, like when I got to be more like college age and like a young adult or, you know, or a teenager, it kind of like in that middle, like we'd certainly occasionally be in like the 6-disc like CD changer, but had a lot of skips, right? Like you kind of don't necessarily always want to hear Waking the Witch or like Jig of Life, not always like time and place for it. So I think probably before like, probably through like my teens, 20s and 30s, I would probably listen to like specific tracks, but like didn't have this concept of like, it's like as a work in its entirety. And I think I read like an article because, you know, Kate Bush is like so notorious for not really being in the public eye and doesn't really do live shows. And I read some like interview with her that was like, oh, this is like a woman who's like album, like I was so like curious and intrigued by, and I kind of know nothing about her. And so in that article, it must have been like late 90s or like early aughts, where she talked about like the ninth wave and kind of like the concept. And I was like, oh, like now I kind of get it. Like the puzzle pieces kind of like start to fit together. So my re-entry to this album was actually like in like the depths of COVID. So like my re-entry to like listening to this album like in its entire, like being intentional about listening to this whole album in its entirety, and like how it kind of functions as like, oh, like a piece, like a journey. This whole like thing was really like, as I was like probably, you know, later, like definitely like 30s and 40s, and like then kind of like mind blown because everything felt familiar. I knew a lot of the like the words, but I had never like necessarily like analyzed them or kind of connected the dots.
I hear what you're saying about like this idea of it being like this complete work, and once I learned about the fact that side 2 was this whole thing, it made more sense, because I always felt like on the first few tracks, if I jumped in on like track 3, it was fine, but like you're right, if I entered on the Waking the Witch track, it was like, what is happening here? I don't know what's going on.
Right.
It can be
scary. yeah I mean, and in some ways it also feels like listening to her now in 2024, I'm not going to say like, oh, she was ahead of her time, because like I feel like that's kind of cliche, but I do feel like it's very apparent now that she was doing something different at the time, and because of the fact that not only was she a woman in a male-dominated industry, but also she was doing her own thing, and I think it was objectively weird, and so as a result, you know, she didn't get the sort of MTV play or the sort of radio play that other artists did. Though I would be curious to know, dear UK guests who have been on our podcast before, chime in here via Instagram when this episode is out.
Cough.
What has what the UK reception of Kate Bush has been like? Because I'm sure it's different than in the US.
We love that context, don't we? There's this sinister thing that you've kind of invoked as well. You know, like an idea of that. Not that it like scared you or anything like that, but maybe that just it was like a little intimidating kind of, and it's in this note of sinisterness that that happens pretty quick. I think you're spot on that she kind of gets there right from the jump. You're talking about accessing this in a different way as you get older. How is that note of is sinisterness the word? How is that the
sinistry maybe?
I'm not sure. Sinistry.
Yeah, making a word up here.
How have you interfaced with that aspect of this kind of tonal palette over the years differently?
Oh, that's interesting. Gosh. Well, I think part of it's like, while there is like very clearly and very quickly like a dark sort of sinister element to it, there are also like parts that are so upbeat and optimistic, and it does feel balanced when you kind of again do consume it kind of as a whole thing, but like one off, it can be super sinister. So I think part of it was actually listening to it as a whole and hearing those like hills and valleys a little bit more, that like not everything is like super dark, and or not everything that's like dark or sinister necessarily is scary, or even if it's challenging, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't like just go kind of like head first into it.
Even like the title track feels very joyous to me.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if you've never heard, there's a UK band called the Futureheads that do a cover of the song "Hounds of Love," and it is quite good. Very different, but quite good. But yeah, there's joy in here.
We're giving you lots of like little Easter egg bands to go and check out, dear listeners, on this one.
But yeah, I think part of it kind of also to like what Michael was saying too, like it was like objectively weird and kind of had this like sinister quality. And I think, but part of that too, which makes it again so cool, is that, you know, it was a fully like self-produced album, right? It's not like there was like a group of producers being like, do this and put this beat here. Like it was her, you know, her light machine and like, you know, synth and like drum, and like it's all like very much like her voice like throughout. And so I feel like because it's kind of stemming from one artist's like vision and like embodiment, like it kind of, even though it's sinister, like it still has like this lightness to it in some sort of like weird way, because it's all kind of like different facets inside of the same person and kind of like her vision like throughout. So she was able to make her voice, you know, super layered and kind of turn it and twist it to sinister ways that you can't necessarily do without like a sampling machine or, you know, some of like the technology that she was exploring and experimenting with. But it's like she was able to take like how she wanted her voice like in her head and be able to translate it onto the album, which kind of like, I don't know if it had been done in that type of manner before. Maybe I'm sure it has at some point, but certainly not within my sphere of knowledge.
A lot of times when we're talking about sort of progressive artists or artists who are really like pushing boundaries and doing something that we've as an audience have never heard. I'm kind of at the place, especially with all that we've learned on this, in this endeavor, this podcast. There was always some outsider artist that was doing it, kind of like in the same kind of rooms that you were talking about in Chicago, right? Those tiny little theaters, and that those were the places that those artists that eventually broke, quote unquote, how they like extracted